August 13th, 7:30 in the morning. We're on the road. We are headed out east to go visit the two oldest existing log cabins in the United States. That's what we're doing. We're on the road.
So why are we going to go look at cabins?
Because we want to build one from scratch, just the way they would have done it. Josh! Hey Josh! Did you get it? Yeah. We first created the Townsends YouTube channel in December of 2008. At first we created videos just to help our customers understand and use the products we were selling. After the first couple of instructional videos, we made funny videos because that's what was happening on YouTube at the time. We tried making a full-length movie. We made a horror short film. But it wasn't till we stumbled upon 18th century cooking that we really understood what we should be doing. The channel immediately took off, and then we realized that our audience really wanted to understand 18th century lifestyle, how regular people lived. Throughout the evolution and growth of the channel, we've done many things. We've created items like the earthen oven. We've cooked hundreds of 18th century recipes. We've studied skills. We've gone to historic sites and we visited them, interviewed people. We've done things like building dugout canoes. But one of the things we've talked about from the very beginning was building a fully functional, authentic 18th century homestead. A living and breathing environment that's made by our hands. So that's what we're doing. We're going to visit these cabins because I want to touch and feel a real log cabin that's 350 years old. So I know exactly what those cabins were like, because this is a huge project. It's going to take more time, cost more money than any of the projects we've ever done. And I really, really want to get this one right. So we're researching for this cabin, this first building in this homestead. Here's a quote from a 1790 book. It says, "The first settler in the woods is generally a man who outlived his credit or his fortune in the cultivated parts of the state. His time for migrating is in the month of April. His first object is to build a small cabin of rough logs for himself and his family. The floor of this cabin is earth. The roof is of split logs. The light is received through the door and in some instances through a small window made of greased paper." The problem is that cabins like these don't really exist anymore. This first generation cabin, this first building that you put on a homestead, very few of these exist, at least like these are described. We visited cabins all over. Tennessee, we were at the Bridal House. There are multiple log homes in our area of Indiana. There's this wonderful site that has 5 or 6 different log homes, but they're that second house or the third house that's on a property, not this first cabin that we're trying to make. We want something with round logs, something that's got a simple notching system like a V-notch, possibly with a catted chimney. You know those chimneys that you see that are not made of brick or stone, but of logs with clay on the inside. We need to know things like how those parts are built, because we can't find these existing round log cabins, this first generation cabin. They don't exist to see, at least around our area of the country. There are very few of them that exist anywhere in the United States, but we found a couple that hopefully we'll see here as we go out east. So when I say first generation, I mean that first building you put on a property when you first move there. Before you have a real house, a barn, or any of those other little structures, you need something to live in while you build the rest of the homestead. So you build this cabin first, then you're going to build a barn, you're going to build a house, you're going to build outbuildings. But we want to figure out what that first structure is like. So we're at Old Bedford Village, Bedford, Pennsylvania, and this is a site with a bunch of different historic buildings. We're just kind of stopping on the way here. This is the oldest structure that's on the site that I know of, 1762 or so. As you can see, it's a log house. It's not necessarily a log cabin, but let's take a look. And we've got, I mean, it was built as two-story with these through beams. Let's look around the side of it. This is probably like 25 foot in square, it looks almost. 30. Yeah, this thing's huge. It's certainly not a cabin. And it's, this must be an inserted piece because it's round log instead of all the other ones are hewn. These are all hewn. We're going to be working with a non-hewn, just round logs. You can see how difficult it is to keep these historic buildings in good shape because they historically probably didn't leave them exposed like this. They would have been sided, and when you expose them, they weather very, very rapidly. So this may have weathered more in the last 50 years than it did in its first 150 years. This has got an internal fireplace, and it looks like it was 1.5 stories instead of 2-story. Yeah, look at that internal, nice big internal hearth here. Definitely a more of a Rumsford fireplace, shallower. It's still pretty low though, but we don't know what the age of the fireplace is. They could have rebuilt it. Oh yeah, it's not dark up here. What you talking about? 1786, but I don't know that these are the original rafters. At least all the ones that I've seen are round log rafter pieces. So I don't know. It's got an interesting notching system. It's that sort of dovetaily or half dovetail notch. It's got a lot of interesting features, but certainly not quite what we're looking for. So this is the oldest building. It's got some really kind of interesting notching, but it's all over the place. Some of them are very picky here. Like they didn't know what they were, quite where they wanted to put that notch. This is a real interesting site. There are so many historic buildings here to look at. It's 25 or 30 different historic buildings. Most of them log structures, so we can get a look at a whole bunch of them. Unfortunately, they were all meant as sort of the permanent home structure, so they're not exactly what we're looking for, but there are some great hints here. The notching isn't perfect. It isn't just, gorgeous notching. Unfortunately, these structures have weathered over the time. They've been repaired multiple times, so we still can't get a perfect glimpse of how they were when they were made originally. Still, a lot of great hints about exactly what we're looking for in what the individual structures were like. Now it's time to head to Philadelphia area, where two of the oldest log cabins, for lack of a better word, are still standing here in the United States. So off to Philly we go. Today was a long haul, a good 12 hours on the road, even more. Rained the whole time. It felt like it was a long drive, and we just got to visit one site. Multiple buildings there, but nothing was really helpful for what we're trying to achieve. So hopefully tomorrow we'll see something that will be a lot more helpful to give us some clues about what we need to build. So it's Wednesday, August 14th, and we got up this morning and drove through the city for a half hour and then down this long winding road into this park. Here is the first of the really two of the apparently oldest log cabins in America, and this one is so cool. I mean, I haven't even gotten up to touch it, look at it, but really it's starting to get a lot closer to what I'm looking for a log cabin than the ones we've looked at previously. So great looking. Not sure what the wood is. Might be oak. It's got these that cut across, so it's got some sort of ceiling on it. It's got one heck of a good foundation. The notching is to get really up close and tight and notice exactly, how tight this V is. These are a V, but the top of the V probably has a good 2 to 3 inch flat at the top of it. Sometimes it's down to 1.5 inches, but you can see that that's not they're not trying to make a full tight point to it, but just really a rounded top with flat sloping slides instead of a full round saddle notch. That's the first thing I'm seeing, and still some of these are pretty tightly done, pretty finely done, and other ones, kind of semi-sloppy, but really pretty tight overall. And it looks like this thing has been weathered for a long time. I don't know if it was ever sided, but I would imagine at some point in its life it was sided, or else after 350 years, which apparently this is that sort of age, this would have weathered a whole lot more. It would just be disintegrated wood, really.
Pretty much the whole cabin is original.
Okay.
Now, we say it is as early as the mid-1640s.
Mm-hmm.
That's when the Swedes settled in the Delaware Valley.
Okay.
And it's been modified here and there. It's original. So here we are in the main room. I'd like to point out that the first people came here were settlers, and they traded with the Indians. And we believe this was where the original family lived, and then probably had children, and they built a second room for the children. Both rooms have a loft accessible by ladder, and that's where we believe everyone slept.
And so even these pieces are original to the 17th century, possibly? Yep. And even the chimney as it's built?
Yes.
In that.
Yes.
So it hasn't been rebuilt?
It has been relined. But no,
right.
It's original.
One of the things that is interesting to me right off the bat is the idea that they're right here beside, and they haven't moved this, right?
No, they have not.
So they're right here, they had all this rock available, and yet they built a wood structure instead of a stone structure, even though they've got a stone fireplace built on the inside that's large and fairly complex. Do we have a guess as to what the floor was like?
It was clay until we concreted it over. There was a flood here in in the late 90s, where the water was up to about 3 feet high, and that made that clay so slippery that it was a safety problem.
Right. So it did originally have a packed clay floor?
It did when I first was introduced to it.
This lower Swedish cabin has got some great features, some wonderful takeaways. Look at these round logs. They're just the right size. This notching system, I think that's exactly what we're going to use. This one is very, very, just almost like what I want to do. Our next stop is right across the river in New Jersey, probably the oldest log home in America still existing. We're here at the Nothnagel cabin. This is Gibbstown, New Jersey. It's the oldest sort of log structure like this in its original location, 1638, something like that. Amazingly old, amazing that it's still in the condition that you can walk into it. This is just a regular home, so it's not an open historic site. Just incredible. Apparently, this chinking is just like it would have done in the time period. I don't think this was ever sided over. This has always been sort of exposed log, which is kind of rare. You can see this wall bulges out, and some of that is to apparently to protect the lower parts so that they didn't rot as bad. It really still is in some very, very amazing condition. I had an opportunity to go inside a little bit, and the interior, it was just so interesting to be able to walk in that spot and feel that kind of feel that you would like you were walking into history. So incredible. I really want to thank Doris and Harry Rink for preserving this building. It's so easy for these to disappear, so they've preserved this. I want to thank them for letting us come and tour this inspiring structure. So we've been to the two oldest log structures. None of those were exactly what we're looking for. We're looking for that quintessential American log cabin, that first structure. And so we decided these were all historic structures, from the time period. The problem is, what we're looking for, it might not exist in its original form anymore. No historical structures exactly like what we're looking for still exist, even though it was a very popular thing. I've got this piece. This is George Washington right before Valley Forge, and he's giving directions. He says, directions for building soldier huts, 14 feet by 16 feet each. The sides, the ends, the roof made of logs. The roof made tight with split slabs and some other way. The sides tight with clay. A fireplace made of wood and secured with clay on the inside, 18 inches thick. This fireplace is to be in the rear of the hut. The door to be at the end next to the street. The doors can be made of split oak unless boards can be procured. The side walls 6.5 feet high. These soldier huts that George Washington was directing to be made, this is actually exactly like the cabin we want to make. So similar to those first structures that anybody would set up if they needed to build a quick structure on a homestead. So where are we going? We're going to Valley Forge National Historic Park so we can see their reproduction soldier huts. These aren't the huts from 240 years ago, but they're reproductions of them. That's what we're going to go see. So we're at the cabin site at Valley Forge National Historic Park in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, and I'm excited to see these reproduction huts, even though they're not historic pieces. Here are our cabins, and these are inspirational. They still probably aren't. I would have to build one a little bit differently than these. These got very, very nice big logs on these. I don't know, if I was building a cabin with just a bunch of guys, I don't know if I'd pick smaller logs than this. Let's go around the back. What we do have is simple saddle notches on this. Would they have made simple saddle notches? Most of the buildings we've seen so far had dovetail notches or even a simple V-notch system. I don't know about doing saddle notches like this. None of the houses we've seen had primitive chimneys, but you could see, George Washington was giving directions for sometimes what's called a catted chimney. In this case, built like the log cabin with logs and then lined on the interior with clay. I'm not sure how they've done these reproduction ones because that kind of stuff takes a lot of maintenance to keep those up. And Washington only meant for those cabins to be very temporary, only lasting till spring. We got a simple roofing system too. It's got simple shakes on this one over here. These are kind of worn out, weathered out, but it gives us a lot better idea of what the simple cut roofing material was like. Now the directions did not say necessarily to make shakes, though. It said to make log splits or long strips that they would probably put vertically and lay one on top of another. It's hard to say exactly how these different groups would do it. He really left a lot of the design free for the soldiers themselves to figure out how to make the hut the way they wanted to. he gave directions for make it this size, make the chimneys out of this material, and they even had a contest about who could make their huts the fastest, and there was a prize for that. So there was definitely some innovation. Different soldier groups would build their huts different ways, and you can imagine the same thing happening with settlers all over America. They'd come into an area, if they were going to build a shelter, they were going to make them in a lot of different designs. Let's take a look at their interpretation for the fireplace and how it hooks into the wall. They're using stone here. You could see in those original directions, he was expecting a fireplace that was lined with clay, 18 inches of clay, and it wouldn't have been just clay. It would have been a mix, likely of sand and clay, and sometimes a binder like straw that they would put in. Sometimes those catted chimneys were called cats because they would make these sort of like a big loaf. Sometimes we call it today a cob construction. You'd take these cobs of clay, lay them in place, and then pack them up nice and tight. They would dry, and if you have the right mix of clay and sand, it doesn't shrink very much. So you have a really, really strong and impervious, at least to heat, type of chimney lining. That's probably what they would have done, or at least that's what George Washington was directing these soldiers to do. And I really wanted to see how they connected up the logs and how that chimney connects up here. And it's really neat. In some of the other cabins, they interpreted this with boards across here. It's sort of a built-in shelving situation. I think that's a pretty fair interpretation. That's what I would do if I saw it like this. But it also means that the logs that we use for the chimney section have to be basically the same size as the logs you use for the rest of the structure, at least when we're down here at the bottom. Here's another connector with some of those earlier cabins we looked at. We've got just an earthen floor, a clay floor. They've put down straw to keep it warm in the wintertime, but a simple floor that's just basically packed earth is really typical of this first generation cabin. The foundation on the structure is another thing that we have to consider to a great extent. Some of these cabins apparently were just built straight on the ground with basically no foundation whatsoever. It's likely that, though, you would have put down 4 cornerstones at least to put the 4 corners of the structure on, and then sort of put your chinking material between the logs and the ground to keep the air out. I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do. I'm not sure what I want to take out of this. The last 2 days we visited more than 25 historic buildings, some of them just 150 years old, some to 350 years old. We've looked at these reproduction cabins, and there's no one structure that gives me the whole story. I'm going to have to take little bits and pieces from each one of them and put them together. I'm going to have to think about this for a while. It's been a rough couple of days. We visited a lot of different structures. We're tired, we're headed home. I was hoping to come out here and find this one structure that we could get all our ideas from, all the inspiration, all the components that we needed to build this structure that we need for the beginning of our homestead. It didn't exist. We didn't get that, and I don't know that it does exist anywhere in the United States. These kind of structures are gone now. But we did see lots of individual components that we can put together. What kind of notching did we want to go with on the corners? What kind of log size do we need? I think a lot of those things come from the lower Swedish cabin. It had some great ideas there. The Northnagel cabin had that was really kind of that one felt the most like you were walking into a cabin from 350 years ago, and that was very inspiring. The chimney construction that we could see, they didn't have it perfect, but got a lot closer to what I think is right at the Valley Forge Park with those cabins, and that size of those cabins was just like perfect. Something like 14 by 16, maybe 12 by 20, something in that range that's a little smaller than a typical log home that was built after the fact, or the second structure that you might build. So there are so many takeaways and little pieces that we saw from all these different buildings that are really going to help us. It was inspiring to be able to walk through some of these structures. I'm so glad that these structures still exist, that we can walk through them. I'm excited about putting together these components and getting to build this ourselves, getting as close as we possibly can to just the kind of cabin. There were thousands and thousands of these made. There's not a single one left. We're going to try to make one. It's going to be a real adventure.